Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're plunging into the really fascinating and intricate history of Germany. We're using a comprehensive historical overview as our guide here.
Right. And our goal in this deep dive, essentially, is to pull out those key moments, those transformative periods that have really shaped Germany's national identity and, its major role in Europe.
We want to give you a grasp of this rich past, but keep it concise enough to follow.
Exactly. A thorough understanding, but hitting the main points.
So, from the earliest tribes right up to modern Germany and the EU, we'll be pulling insights together to give you a clear picture of the forces at play. Okay, let's dive in. Right at the beginning, the early foundations.
Okay, so the area we now call Germany originally was home to various Germanic tribes. And these societies, they were really characterized by a fierce independence, a strong warrior culture, yeah, but also very distinct social structures. Our overview really highlights this.
Yeah, what really jumps out at me is their resistance to Roman expansion. It sounds like more than just, border fights. It fundamentally shaped them.
Oh, absolutely. That long period of resistance, it really fostered a sense of shared identity, a kind of resilience among the different tribes. But it wasn't total isolation either. You did have Roman influences filtering in, mainly through things like trade and sometimes alliances.
So it lists some marks. Infrastructure, maybe language.
Some traces, yeah, but
Yeah.
probably limited compared to, say, Gaul.
Yeah.
It wasn't a full-scale Romanization by any means.
Right. Then you get this major shift, the fall of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century. What happens immediately after that?
Well, the collapse of Roman authority basically creates a power vacuum. And into that vacuum step emerging powerful kingdoms.
Like the Franks.
Exactly. The Frankish kingdom under Clovis I is really significant here, especially his conversion to Christianity. That event, it lays a crucial foundation for the Christianization of many Germanic peoples. Huge cultural and political implications down the line.
Okay, and then Charlemagne, the Carolingian Empire.
Precisely. Charlemagne's reign, and specifically his coronation as Holy Roman Emperor in 800 AD, it symbolized this powerful fusion. You've got Roman legacy, Christian faith, and Germanic traditions all coming together.
A really pivotal moment for understanding, well, the deep historical roots.
Absolutely.
Foundational. But that big, unified empire,
Yeah.
It didn't last, did it? It gets divided. The Treaty of Verdun.
That's right, it fractured. The partitioning of Charlemagne's empire, that leads directly to the formation of the Eastern Frankish kingdom. And that's widely seen as the direct precursor to the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation.
And internally, these new territories, they're marked by feudalism, decentralized.
Very much so. Feudalism becomes the dominant structure, and governance is highly decentralized. Lots of local power.
So this early fragmentation, it seems really key to understanding why Germany's later history is so complex. With all the regional differences in language, culture, political power.
Exactly. Those seeds were planted very early on. Okay, so maybe we should delve a bit deeper into these Germanic tribes themselves. Where did they actually come from? What defined their societies?
Well, the overview points to a Northern European origin, shared linguistic traits, cultural things, social structures. But what's striking is this idea of decentralized leadership. Power wasn't all with one king.
That's a really crucial distinction to make. It wasn't just a lack of central authority. It was a different kind of system. Power often resided more with the tribe, the gens,
Right.
Tribal assemblies, consensus. They were important. Kings were often more like representatives needing the backing of the tribe. It wasn't the top-down model you saw in Rome, more about mutual support.
And this tribal autonomy, it only got stronger after the Western Roman Empire started to weaken.
Oh, definitely. As Roman administration faded, these tribes could assert their own ways even more. You see a kind of resurgence in tribal unity in some areas, and the adaptability of these systems, like with the Franks, provided a framework for medieval governance later on.
Fascinating how those early structures cast such a long shadow. Now let's circle back to that Roman influence. You said it wasn't just conflict.
Not at all. Roman expansion spanning centuries led to the establishment of the limes, the frontier along the Rhine and Danube.
Just military fortifications?
Well, yes, military, but they also became major conduits for trade, for cultural exchange. Think of them as zones of interaction, not just barriers.
So these military zones actually help spread culture and commerce.
In many ways, yes. And the Roman military presence itself spurred urbanization. Cities like Cologne, Mainz, they grew into important provincial centers.
And Roman ways spread.
Gradually, yes. Customs, technologies, administrative ideas. They built roads, bridges huge for regional commerce, Roman law, architecture, even bits of language added influence.
But it wasn't just a one-way street, right? The Romans weren't just imposing things.
Absolutely not. It was definitely a two-way exchange. The Romans brought things like advanced agriculture, literacy, coinage, but they also adopted Germanic military tactics, learned about the local environment.
So a complex relationship, alliances sometimes, resistance other times.
Exactly. Tribes like the Chatti, the Cherugi, they show this dynamic perfectly, sometimes cooperating, sometimes fiercely resisting Roman power.
In the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest, that's a famous example of resistance, a major setback for Rome.
A huge moment, yes.
Yeah.
It effectively halted their expansion deeper into Germania. But even after that, Roman influence didn't just disappear. Trade continued, there was intermarriage, technology sharing. It all laid groundwork for the cultural mix that defined medieval Europe later. So yeah, complex and lasting, despite the conflict.
Okay, so we've covered those early foundations. Now let's move into the long stretch of the Middle Ages and beyond. What's the big picture here?
Right. The Middle Ages in Germany, this period from roughly the fall of Rome up to the early modern era, say the 15th century, it saw really profound changes, economic, social, political transformations that kept shaping the region.
And we see the rise of feudal systems and, of course, the Holy Roman Empire under dynasties like the Ottonians and Salians.
Yes, the 10th and 11th centuries were absolutely critical for that. You see this reorganization of territories across Europe, really, and a strengthening of power in these princely states, these royal states. It mirrors broader European trends in state building.
Then comes the Black Death in the 14th century, devastating.
Absolutely devastating. The sheer loss of population forced a major restructuring of economies, social hierarchies. Urban fiscal systems changed, labor markets were totally disrupted.
Any unexpected outcomes?
Surprisingly, yes. You see innovations in areas like mining and metallurgy starting to emerge, which actually laid some groundwork for later financial systems. Kind of counterintuitive.
And it wasn't just disease changing things. Technology played a part too, shifting power balances.
Definitely. Advances in military strategy, new agricultural techniques, these started shifting power away from the traditional feudal lords towards the rising merchant classes in the cities.
And Germany gets more involved in wider trade networks.
Yes, significantly. Through things like the Hanseatic League, German cities and merchants became major players in European trade, even reaching further afield.
And amidst all this upheaval, economic, social love, you also have religious and intellectual movements brewing, eventually leading towards the Reformation.
Precisely. The 14th and 15th centuries were incredibly fertile ground for the ideas that would explode in the Protestant Reformation. And then the religious conflicts that followed, they actually ended up consolidating the power of individual princes and, interestingly, reinforcing the already fragmented nature of the Holy Roman Empire.
Okay, let's zoom in on this Holy Roman Empire. It sounds grand, but what was it really like?
Well, it emerges in the early medieval period, really as an attempt to revive the legacy, the prestige of the old Roman Empire in the West, formally established, you could say, in 962 AD with Otto VI's coronation.
So the idea was it would be the secular arm of Christendom, uniting Central Europe.
That was the grand vision, yes. Uniting these diverse regions, often under German leadership. The relationship between the Pope and the Emperor was absolutely central to this, but also, very often, incredibly tense. They were constantly bumping up against each other's authority.
And it lasted for ages, almost 1,000 years.
Incredible longevity, yeah. It massively shaped medieval European history and definitely influenced how nation-states eventually developed.
But it wasn't a unified state like we think of today, was it?
Not even close. It's much more accurate to think of it as a conglomerate, a collection of territories, kingdoms, duchies, bishoprics, free cities, all loosely bound together, but with power very much decentralized.
So the emperor's power wasn't absolute across the board.
Far from it. Often, the emperor's real power was strongest in his own direct lands. Ruling the whole empire depended heavily on diplomacy, on securing the allegiance of powerful regional rulers, managing succession politics. It was a constant balancing act.
It sounds like a perpetual negotiation between trying to be unified and the reality of all these local powers.
That's a great way to put it. The whole environment was leaders constantly jockeying for position, for land, for influence, navigating this really complex interplay between religious authority and secular rule. Think of the investiture controversy, a classic example.
And even though it dissolved in 1806, its legacy persisted.
Oh, absolutely. Particularly in this ongoing European theme of balancing unity and autonomy, central power versus regional rights.
Yeah.
You can trace threads back to the HRE.
Okay. Now, feudalism in Germany during this time, how did that system specifically work and shape society?
Right. Feudalism emerges as the core socioeconomic structure in the early Middle Ages. It's basically a hierarchical system built around land ownership and, crucially, the exchange of services and obligations.
So the monarch at the top granting land, these fiefs to nobles.
Correct. Dukes, counts, and so on.
Indeed.
In exchange for their loyalty, their promise of military service.
And these nobles then had a lot of power in their own territories.
Considerable autonomy, yes. They often ran their own courts, collected their own taxes, wielded significant political influence locally. And beneath them, you had this whole network of vassals, knights, who owed service to their lords in return for their own land or protection.
And at the bottom of this pyramid, the peasants, the serfs.
Yes, bound to the land, to the fief. Their obligation was primarily labor and providing a share of the agricultural produce. Land was really the currency of power and interaction in this system.
Was German feudalism different from how it worked elsewhere in Europe, say France or England?
Yes, there were definitely distinct features. Germany often had a greater degree of power fragmentation. Regional lords frequently held more power relative to the Holy Roman Emperor compared to, say, French nobles relative to their king.
So less centralized control overall.
Generally, yes.
Yeah.
It resulted in this real patchwork quilt of territories, each with slightly different customs, different laws. It wasn't uniform.
So feudalism, while a common European thing, really developed its own German characteristics, kind of reinforcing that regionalism and setting the stage for later political structures.
Exactly. Okay, let's jump forward now to a period of massive intellectual and social change. The Age of Enlightenment, late 17th, 18th centuries.
Right. This is where you see this incredible surge in philosophy, science, culture.
Absolutely. You have towering figures like Immanuel Kant, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, really shaping the intellectual climate. Kant, especially, with his emphasis on reason, ethics, individual autonomy, famously urging people to dare to know, to think for themselves.
And it wasn't just abstract philosophy, right? Universities, academies were growing too.
Yes, these institutions became crucial hubs for exploring new ideas, driving scientific discovery. And the spread of these ideas was massively amplified by print, culture, books, journals, pamphlets were reaching a much wider audience than ever before.
And these Enlightenment ideas, they started influencing political thinking too, challenging the old ways.
Oh, definitely. Ideas about equality, individual freedoms, justice, they directly challenged the basis of absolutist rule. Thinkers argued for governance based on reason, on empirical evidence, aimed at the public good. It laid crucial groundwork for political reforms, not just in Germany, but across Europe.
And after the main Enlightenment wave, you get figures like Fichte and Hegel.
Yeah.
How did they build on or maybe critique Enlightenment thought?
Well, both Fichte and Hegel, in different ways, kind of pushed back against what they saw as the Enlightenment's over-reliance on purely individual empirical reason. Fichte, for instance, moved towards this idea of a collective we, grounded in shared national aspirations, a kind of divine rationality he explored in his Science of Knowledge. He wanted Germany to move beyond just the isolated individual I.
And Hegel, he was critical too.
Yes, Hegel also questioned just relying on abstract reason. He argued for a more unified vision of freedom, where individuals realize universal human ideals within a cohesive social and political structure, what he called spirit.
So a shift towards German idealism, integrating the individual into a larger collective framework.
Exactly. Integrating individuals within a collective intellectual and ethical framework, all aimed at achieving the common good. They saw this as vital for Germany's development.
And culturally, this whole period was incredibly rich too, wasn't it?
Absolutely vibrant. A real explosion in literature, music, art. In literature, you have giants like Johann Wolfgang von Goethe and Friedrich Schiller exploring deep questions about human nature, morality, the search for knowledge.
And music. Germany became a powerhouse.
A leading center, no doubt. You have Ludwig van Beethoven, whose work, while spanning eras, really embodies those Enlightenment ideals of freedom, resilience, and earlier Johann Sebastian Bach, with his incredible emotional depth and intellectual complexity.
What about visual arts?
You see movements like neoclassicism, but also the rise of romanticism. Think of Caspar David Friedrich's landscapes. Those often balance the awe-inspiring power of nature with the individual's place within it. Reflects the philosophical currents of the time.
Okay, a truly flourishing cultural scene. Now, let's shift gears to probably the defining political event of the 19th century for Germany, unification, transforming from all those separate states into one powerful nation.
A massive transformation. Remember, in the early 1800s, German-speaking people lived scattered across dozens of small kingdoms, principalities, duchies, remnants of the Holy Roman Empire, then the German Confederation.
But the drive for unity was growing. Nationalism, economic ties.
Yes, nationalism was a powerful rising tide, and economic cooperation, like the Zollverein Customs Union, was pulling them closer together.
And enter Otto von Bismarck, the key architect, realpolitik.
Absolutely central. Bismarck was a master of realpolitik, that pragmatic, often ruthless approach to politics. He used strategic diplomacy, calculated military action, and clever alliances to sideline rivals, especially Austria, and consolidate power under Prussia.
Through a series of wars, right, leading up to the Franco-Prussian War.
Precisely. These wars against Denmark, then Austria, finally France, were deliberately orchestrated to achieve unification. The war with France, in particular, really galvanized the German states, whipping up nationalist fervor against a common enemy.
And the German victory led directly to the proclamation of the German Empire in 1871, a huge shift in European power.
A seismic shift. Germany suddenly emerged as the dominant continental power, kicking off an era of intense industrial growth, major political influence, and a complex process of cultural merging.
Let's dig into Bismarck a bit more. His role went beyond just the wars, didn't it? He shaped the new empire internally, too.
Oh, very much so. He was just as adept at managing internal politics, navigating the Reichstag, the new parliament.
Yeah.
His domestic policy had two main goals, really: strengthening national unity and suppressing anyone he saw as a threat to that unity or to Prussian dominance.
Like the Kulturkampf against the Catholic Church
Yeah.
and the anti-socialist laws.
Exactly. Those were key examples of trying to control potential centers of opposition. But interestingly, he also introduced a pretty comprehensive social welfare system. Things like health insurance, accident insurance, pensions.
Why? Was that purely altruistic?
Well, it was partly an attempt to win over the working class, to undercut the appeal of socialism. The classic Bismarckian move: suppress with one hand, appease with the other. His influence started to fade, though, after Kaiser Wilhelm II came to the throne, leading to his resignation in 1890. But his legacy, shaping Germany's military power, its economy, even its social structure, absolutely undeniable.
Okay, and that Franco-Prussian War was the final crucial piece of the puzzle. What really sparked it, and why were the Prussians so successful?
Right, the war itself ran from July 1870 to May 1871. The background was rising tension over Prussia's growing power. France felt increasingly threatened. The immediate trigger, though, was the Ems dispatch. Bismarck cleverly edited a telegram about a diplomatic meeting to make it sound insulting to both sides, deliberately provoking France into declaring war.
A calculated move to rally the other German states?
Exactly. Unite them against a common enemy. And militarily, the Prussian army, along with its German allies, was just better prepared. Better organization, superior Krupp artillery, much more effective use of railways for mobilizing troops quickly.
Leading to decisive victories like Sedan.
Yes, the Battle of Sedan was catastrophic for the French Emperor. Napoleon III himself was captured. Then came the long, harsh siege of Paris. The military outcome was pretty clear-cut.
With massive political consequences.
Huge. The Treaty of Frankfurt formally ended the war. And even before that, in January 1871, the German Empire was proclaimed in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, a hugely symbolic act right in the heart of defeated France. It cemented Germany's dominance, redrew the map of alliances, and sowed seeds for future tensions, definitely.
So the German Empire is born in 1871. What's this new era like?
It's a period of incredibly rapid industrialization, huge socioeconomic change, but also quite a bit of political turbulence under the surface. Initially, under Bismarck, you have relative stability, his realpolitik keeping things balanced externally and internally trying to forge unity, like with the Kulturkampf.
But things changed when Wilhelm II took over in 1888.
Big time. Wilhelm II was much more dynamic, erratic, some would say. He dismissed Bismarck and pursued a much more aggressive, assertive foreign policy, the Weltpolitik. Germany becomes this formidable European power, no doubt, but internally you start seeing more challenges, more dissent, especially bubbling up in cultural and artistic areas.
That's interesting. Even within this powerful, seemingly unified empire, there was artistic dissent. How did that show itself?
Yes, there was a significant current of dissent, challenging the Kaiser's sort of authoritarian style and the state-approved conservative culture. While the government tried to use art to promote nationalism, often very militaristic themes, you had groups of artists, particularly in cities like Munich and Dresden, forming associations to promote more innovative, sometimes quite subversive art.
Like Expressionism. Did that emerge here?
Exactly. Expressionism really found fertile ground in this climate. It was inherently challenging to the establishment, very avant-garde. Artists used it to critique society, politics, often with this intense emotional expression moving away from realism. It was a direct pushback against the Kaiser's preferred aesthetics and reflected broader unease. These artist associations were vital for protecting artistic freedom and offering alternative views.
Okay, let's switch back to that massive industrialization. It was transforming everything.
Absolutely. Saxony is a great case study here.
Yeah.
It faced early problems, losing some traditional markets, high transport costs, blocking access to seaports. Its textile industries really struggled. Heavy reliance on external markets, fierce international competition.
But they adapted, innovated.
They did. Saxony's leaders used a mix of government support and private initiative. They set up state-funded technical schools, way back in 1828 polytechnics, even Sunday schools for artisans. They promoted industrial groups, held exhibitions. Not everything worked. An attempt at an Elba West Indian Trading Company failed. But the big turning point was joining the Zollverein, the customs union, in 1834.
That gave them access to a bigger German market.
Exactly. A large, stable trading area. That allowed Saxony to really leverage its technical skills, its entrepreneurs, its large workforce, and break free from those earlier limitations. They plugged right into the booming, unified German economy.
And around this time, Germany also starts looking outwards towards colonial expansion, though quite late compared to Britain or France.
That's right. For the first decade or so after unification, Bismarck was really focused on consolidating power in Europe, keeping things stable. It was only later in the 19th century, driven by economic pressures at home, need for resources, markets, and also the sense of international competition, needing colonies for prestige, that Germany really pushed for overseas territories.
The Berlin Conference was important for that?
Yes, the Berlin Conference of 1884-85 sort of formalized the scramble for Africa and gave Germany international recognition for its claims in places like Southwest Africa, East Africa, Cameroon, Togoland. But Germany really struggled with managing these colonies. They lacked experience compared to the older colonial powers.
And German Southwest Africa, that story's particularly dark, isn't it, with the genocide?
Tragically dark. German policies there, land seizures, forced labor, led directly to horrific conflict with the indigenous Herero and Nama peoples, culminating in the genocide between 1904 and 1908. It involved brutal military campaigns, starvation, concentration camps. It's a horrific chapter. Ultimately, Germany's colonial project was pretty fragile, plagued by problems, and they lost all their colonies during World War I. The Treaty of Versailles in 1919 officially ended it.
Which brings us inevitably to World War I itself, a cataclysm that reshaped everything.
Absolutely pivotal. World War I wasn't just a massive military conflict. It was a deep cultural and psychological turning point for Germany, and indeed for Europe. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand lit the fuse, but it ignited a continent already tangled in alliances and primed for mobilization.
And the scale of the war, the way it was fought, totally unprecedented.
The industrial scale of warfare, especially the brutal attritional fighting on the Western Front for Verdun, the sum led to unimaginable destruction, draining Germany's resources and manpower. Add to that the Allied naval blockade, which caused immense hardship back home, shortages, hunger, real civilian suffering.
And this internal pressure led to political collapse.
By 1918, yes, internal turmoil, growing dissent, it all boiled over into revolution. Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicated, the monarchy ended, and the Weimar Republic, a fragile democracy, was born out of the ashes.
And the war's impact on culture, you mentioned expressionism earlier.
Profound influence. Artists like Ernst Barlach grappled with the trauma, the disillusionment. You see a strong surge of pacifism in artistic circles, a deep questioning of the values that led to the war.
Looking back, what were the key underlying causes of the war, specifically from the German perspective at the time?
Well, one major factor was the ideology of pan-Germanism. This was an aggressive push for territorial expansion, especially eastward, the Drang nach Osten, into Slavic lands. It was a toxic mix of militarism, racism, extreme nationalism, chauvinism, xenophobia.
Believing Germany had a destiny to dominate.
Very much so. A belief that after unification, Germany was destined for global power. And this fueled a massive military buildup spending increased fivefold after 1871. The naval race with Britain, started by Wilhelm II, was a huge part of this, directly challenging British sea power.
So a mindset where military strength equals national greatness.
Exactly, and key figures bought into it. The chief of the General Staff, von Schlieffen, was publicly saying a major war was inevitable back in 1905. Germany basically became this unified military camp, ready for a fight, while fatally underestimating diplomacy. Mobilization itself just poured fuel on the fire.
Underestimating diplomacy, primed for war, and the consequences were devastating, especially the Treaty of Versailles afterwards.
Catastrophic for Germany. The treaty had massive, lasting negative effects. The infamous war guilt clause, blaming Germany solely for the war, felt deeply unjust and led to demands for crippling reparations payments. Territorial losses were huge.
And the reparations really hammered the economy.
Crippled the fragile post-war economy, yes. Then you had the strict disarmament clauses, tiny army, no conscription, which caused huge resentment, losing territory like Alsace-Lorraine to France, the Polish corridor cutting off East Prussia, all deeply unpopular.
It felt like a dictated peace, a diktat, and that fueled extremism.
Precisely. The sense of humiliation and injustice created fertile ground for nationalist and extremist movements, most fatefully, the Nazi Party. Many of the Weimar Republic struggles' economic instability, political polarization can be directly linked back to Versailles. Then the Great Depression hit, making everything 10 times worse.
So the treaty meant to secure peace, ironically, helped create the conditions for the next conflict. Okay, let's move into that turbulent interwar period and the rise of Nazism. The Weimar Republic, born in 1919.
Yes. Established right in the chaotic aftermath of the war. It faced immense challenges from the start. The Versailles Treaty pressures, constant threats from both far-left and far-right extremist groups trying to overthrow it.
Yet, amidst all that instability, it was this incredible hotbed of cultural and artistic creativity.
It's a striking paradox, isn't it? Weimar leaders were constantly battling crises. Hyperinflation in the early 20s was devastating. But culturally, it was like a renaissance. You had the Bauhaus movement revolutionizing design and architecture. German literature was thriving. Visual arts exploded with expressionism. New objectivity artists grappling with the trauma of war, critiquing society.
So a real golden age culturally, but politically and economically on shaky ground. Now, this broader political instability in 20th century Germany seems crucial to understanding its path.
Absolutely fundamental. The Weimar Republic's struggles, economic hardship, reparations, political fragmentation, constant uprisings eventually led to its collapse. And that paved the way for Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party in the early 1930s.
And their policy of Gleichschaltung coordination was key to consolidating power so quickly.
Yes, Gleichschaltung was the systematic process of forcing every aspect of German society, politics, culture, social organizations, everything into line with Nazi ideology. It meant eliminating all opposition, dismantling democracy, extending total state control. Propaganda was absolutely essential to this, constantly pushing Nazi ideas and building Hitler's cult of personality.
The consequences were terrifying. Total suppression, a totalitarian state.
Utterly. But it's also crucial to remember Germany's post-war efforts to confront this past. Vergangenheitsbewältigung, coming to terms with the past, has been absolutely central to shaping modern Germany's identity as a stable democracy and a leader in Europe.
How did the cultural developments we talked about intertwine with these political shifts?
Deeply intertwined. You had Romanticism in the 19th century influencing national ideas. Then the Weimar Republic's vibrant, experimental culture, contrasting sharply with its political chaos, a tension the Nazis exploited. Then the Nazi era itself brought the culture camp, this brutal attempt to control culture, promote Aryan art, denounce anything degenerate, modernist, or Jewish. Thankfully, that enforced conformity didn't last. Post-WWII, there was a major cultural reset, rejecting totalitarianism, acknowledging the past, promoting humanist values, laying the groundwork for Germany's cultural strength today.
Okay, let's focus specifically on the rise of Nazism. It wasn't overnight, was it? It built on existing problems.
No, it was a complex process rooted in several factors. The economic chaos after World War I, and especially after the Great Depression hit around 1929, very clever and pervasive propaganda, and the manipulation of deep-seated cultural anxieties and nationalist feelings.
The Depression was a major catalyst.
Absolutely critical. Mass unemployment, poverty. People became deeply disillusioned with the Weimar government. The Nazis offered simple answers, scapegoats, and promised a return to national greatness, economic recovery, and elimination of perceived threats. Communists, Jews, the Versailles Treaty.
And they tacked into cultural nationalism, too, ideas of racial purity.
Very effectively. Cultural themes were central to their propaganda, racial purity, protecting German identity from supposed foreign corruption. They tied these ideas to people's fears, historical grievances, positioning themselves as saviors of German culture and race. They even twisted pseudo-scientific theories and romantic philosophies to make it seem like a continuation of German tradition. By early 1933, they had enough popular support for Hitler to seize power and establish the dictatorship.
And Hitler's own path to power involved a lot of political maneuvering, exploiting the chaos.
It's exactly. After his failed coup in 1923, he changed tactics, aiming for power through legal means, exploiting the Weimar system's weaknesses. The economic crises, hyperinflation in 23, the depression from 29 created the perfect storm. His message, promising to tear up Versailles, restore pride, find scapegoats, it resonated.
By 1932, the Nazis were the largest party, but still no majority. His appointment as chancellor in January 33 was the real turning point.
The absolute turning point. Then events like the Reichstag fire were used as pretext to crush opposition, suspend civil liberties. He got emergency powers from President Hindenburg and systematically dismantled democracy, creating a one-party state within months.
But even then, his control wasn't total. There was still opposition, even within the military.
That's important to remember, yes. There was significant opposition, even conspiracies among high-ranking military officers who were appalled by him. That's the 1938 plot, the famous July 20th, 1944 bomb plot led by Stauffenberg. These showed that even at the height of his power, his control wasn't absolute. There were brave people resisting.
So the overall impact of this whole turbulent history on German society today, profound and multifaceted.
Immensely so. You have the post-war Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle, which rebuilt the country and established its economic power. That was crucial for redefining national identity towards openness, European integration. Then there's the constant presence of Vergangenheitsbewältigung, dealing with the Nazi past, which shapes education, culture, public discourse.
And you see changes in society, demographics, diversity.
Absolutely. Cities like Berlin really embody this: shifting populations, cultural diversity, the ongoing process of integrating migrant communities. You also see things like a cautious resurgence of patriotism, maybe starting around the 2006 World Cup, balanced with Germany's strong commitment to its role in the EU and international affairs.
And the media plays a big role in ongoing discussions.
A huge role, facilitating dialogue between citizens, policymakers, helping Germany navigate its path as a leading European nation committed to democracy, historical awareness, and cultural exchange.
Which leads us, tragically, to World War II and the Holocaust. We have to acknowledge these as the essential, horrific context for what came next, the post-war division of Germany.
Yes, absolutely essential context. The unconditional surrender of the Third Reich on May 8, 1945, set the stage for the Allies, the US, USSR, UK, France, to decide Germany's future. They met in 1947 to start thrashing out the details.
And the Allies were determined to reconstruct Germany, but also ensure it could never start another war. Denazification was key.
Absolutely. After two devastating world wars initiated by Germany, the Allies, along with input from nations like Poland, who had suffered immensely, were resolute about preventing any kind of militaristic revival. But these negotiations were happening just as the Cold War was starting to freeze over.
So the division into East and West Germany became a direct reflection of that bigger ideological battle between the US and the Soviet Union.
Exactly. The partition of Germany and Berlin within it became the most potent symbol of the Cold War divide. East Germany fell under Soviet control, became a socialist state. West Germany aligned with the West, received Marshall Plan aid, and experienced its economic miracle. This split dominated German life and international relations for the next 4 decades.
And life in East Germany versus West Germany, starkly different.
Incredibly different. The partition was driven by competing Allied interests. The GDR, East Germany, was communist, heavily influenced by Moscow. State control was pervasive economy, personal freedoms. Centralized planning led to stagnation, shortages, political repression, surveillance by the Stasi. It created an atmosphere of fear.
While the West, the FRG, followed a different path.
Completely different. Capitalist, democratic, allied with the West. It saw huge economic growth, free markets, foreign investment, plus expanding social welfare, stable democracy, a vibrant culture. The contrast in living standards was immense, which is why so many East Germans wanted to leave, leading eventually to the building of the Berlin Wall in 1961. That wall really symbolized the whole Cold War struggle in microcosm.
And Germany, divided, was right at the epicenter of this Cold War confrontation.
Right on the front line. Both West Germany, FRG, and East Germany, GDR, were constantly maneuvering under the influence of their respective superpower patrons. Interestingly, though, by the 1980s, you started seeing some shifts. East Germany, under Honecker, began cautiously re-engaging with parts of German history, like putting Frederick the Great statue back up.
Symbolic gestures, acknowledging shared heritage.
Partly symbolic, yes, but also driven by practical needs. Cold War tensions were actually rising again, Post-Afghan Afghanistan, NATO missiles making some level of inter-German dialogue seem prudent for risk management. Plus, East Germany's economy was really struggling, increasingly dependent on West German loans. So despite the deep political divide, there was an incentive to improve relations. These factors led to a kind of cautious engagement in the years just before the wall came down.
Which brings us to that incredible moment in 1990, the reunification of Germany.
A truly defining moment, ending decades of division as the Cold War itself was ending. The fall of the Berlin Wall in November 1989 was the catalyst, the absolute trigger.
Leading to the collapse of East Germany and its integration into West Germany. A time of huge excitement, but also uncertainty.
Absolutely. Enthusiasm, yes, but also massive questions about the social, political, economic consequences. The path was shaped by both global shifts and internal dynamics.
International factors like Gorbachev's policies weakening the Soviet grip, and internal pressure from East Germans demanding freedom.
It's exactly. Pro-democracy movements were sweeping Eastern Europe. And domestically, West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl pushed hard and fast for integration. Crucially, they secured the agreement of the four Allied powers for a unified Germany to remain in NATO. Official reunification, October 3rd, 1990.
But merging the two Germanys wasn't simple. Big disparities.
Far from simple. East Germany had to rapidly shift from a state-controlled socialist economy to Western capitalism. Huge challenges: outdated infrastructure, massive unemployment as state industries closed, overhauling the entire political and legal system. Despite all the hurdles, reunification is fundamental to modern German identity. It showed a capacity to overcome deep division and set the stage for Germany's new role in Europe.
And the fall of the Berlin Wall itself remains such a powerful symbol.
An incredibly potent symbol. November 9th, 1989, the end of the physical and ideological split. The wall, built in '61, was the ultimate symbol of the Cold War divide. Its fall wasn't just about Germany. It signaled huge changes across Eastern Europe.
Reunification meant merging everything: governments, institutions, even archives.
Everything. Harmonizing politics, economics, social systems, integrating schools, merging federal archives. That alone was a massive task. The dissolution of the GDR meant completely reorganizing the new federal states, the new lender in the East.
And the economic fallout was tough. High unemployment in the East.
Very tough for many. Double-digit unemployment for periods. Plus, this huge societal reckoning with the past, particularly the Stasi files millions wanted access, demanded transparency and accountability. While the unification itself was peaceful, which was remarkable, the practical challenges like merging archives were immense. It's often seen as a case study, offering lessons for other divided regions.
And those immediate challenges of reunification right after October 3rd, 1990, they were enormous, more than just politics.
Oh, huge. It required this deep fusion, economic, social, cultural. Economically, the gap was vast. The East needed massive investment in modernization, productivity. State companies collapsing meant soaring unemployment there, needing huge financial transfers from the West.
And socially, integrating people with such different experiences.
Really difficult. Different living standards, different social norms, different expectations led to this idea of the Mauer im Kopf, the wall in the mind, mistrust, feelings of being left behind in the East sometimes, politically, merging institutions, aligning laws, public administration, a huge undertaking. Plus, it had big international implications for the balance of power in Europe, for the EU's financial stability. It was the start of a long journey towards true unity, not just an endpoint, a catalyst for forging a new, single German identity.
Okay, let's focus now on modern Germany, its journey since reunification.
Right. So after the division in '49, you had West Germany's Wirtschaftswunder, that amazing economic recovery and growth under Adenauer, fueled by the Marshall Plan and democracy. East Germany, meanwhile, had the socialist planned economy facing inefficiency, repression. The Berlin Wall in '61 starkly symbolized the division.
Then the peaceful protests in the East in the '80s, the wall falling in '89, reunification in '90.
Exactly. And reunification brought those challenges we discussed, socioeconomic gaps needing huge investment and reform. But out of all that, modern Germany has emerged as a really key international player. It uses its economic strength, but also draws on its complex history, particularly within the EU and other global organizations.
Committed to democracy, human rights, international law.
Very much so. That's central to its identity now. But it still faces domestic challenges, of course, dealing with historical memory, integrating diverse populations, maintaining democratic values. These are ongoing tasks. But it's definitely a leader in global cooperation and conflict resolution efforts.
And the political landscape today still reflects that complex history, the shadow of the Nazi past, the division.
It absolutely does. Vergangenheitsbewältigung, dealing with the Nazi era, is still present. This constant balancing act of acknowledging horrors while also understanding victimhood. Even after reunification, that wall on the head between East and West took time to break down, reflecting different experiences.
But newer generations are perhaps moving beyond that.
Increasingly so, yes. More mobile, more connected, more European in outlook perhaps. Reunification definitely boosted Germany's central role in the EU, which means constantly juggling national interests with European and global ones. Germany's taken the lead on economic policy, human rights issues, international crises.
And civic life, a stronger sense of national identity now.
There was perhaps a reinvigoration, maybe around the 2006 World Cup, a more relaxed sense of patriotism. Internally, politics involves bridging generational gaps, understanding GDR history through education, cultural exchange. Media and youth engagement are vital for its resilient democracy, which is characterized by historical awareness, demographic change, and a strong democratic core.
Economically, Germany remains a powerhouse. How did it get there?
Well, you had that late 19th century industrial boom, railroads, mining, manufacturing, chemicals, making it a top European economy. Railroads were key. Incredibly efficient, and the universal banking system, combining commercial and investment banking, provided the capital industry needed. That was seen as a very effective model early on.
Then devastation after WWII, followed by the Wirtschaftswunder.
Exactly. Massive reconstruction, structural reforms, crucial external aid like the Marshall Plan led to astonishing growth. Key factors were stable institutions, favorable global conditions, and a very successful export-focused strategy, especially in manufacturing and engineering. Strong institutions and smart state involvement have been pretty consistent themes.
And Germany's integration into the European Union, absolutely central to its post-war story and its current standing.
Utterly central. A core goal after WWII was rehabilitating its image, becoming a partner for peace. The Basic Law, the Constitution of 1949, explicitly states the aim of achieving world peace as an equal partner in a united Europe.
So an active participant from the beginning.
Very active. It's evolved into a key leader within the EU, heavily influencing policy, political direction. Its influence now spans governance, social issues, culture, economics. Educational and cultural exchanges have boomed, strengthening ties. And its willingness to confront its history, the Vergangenheitsbewältigung, has been vital for its credibility in Europe. You see it in the dynamism of cities like Berlin, too. It's positioned itself as a central force in the EU and globally.
Playing a major role in EU politics, which has evolved over time.
Definitely evolved, especially dramatically after reunification in 1990. There's this idea of the normalization thesis, Germany moving from being a rehabilitated post-war state to becoming a stabilizing, even leading force in the EU. Domestic and European policies are increasingly linked.
Reunification changed the dynamics within the EU itself significantly. It contributed to redesigning EU policies. Germany's taken the lead on big economic challenges like the Eurozone crisis, often pushing for financial regulation, fiscal discipline. It strongly promotes regional stability, especially its close relationship with France. It works through collaborative diplomacy, multinational frameworks. Its role reflects broader EU changes to enlargement, managing tensions between old and new members. And public opinion in Germany generally supports active engagement in EU economic and political issues.
And its economic contributions to the EU are massive.
Unparalleled, really. Strong industrial base, innovation, huge exports. Europe's largest economy, fourth largest in the world. It's a cornerstone of EU stability. It drives regional growth, facilitates trade across the bloc.
Key industries like automotive, engineering. Exactly. Automotive, engineering, chemicals, pharmaceuticals. German industry sets global standards. This dominance supports EU integration. Germany also champions fiscal discipline, structural reforms across the EU, sometimes controversially, pushing for austerity. It played a key role supporting weaker economies via the European Stability Mechanism during the debt crisis, often linking aid to austerity. As an export giant, it pushes for free trade, deeper integration. Plus, German companies invest heavily across the EU, bringing jobs and technology. And now it's also a leader in pushing for sustainable practices, the energy transition.
Culturally, too, Germany's contributions are immense and foundational for Western civilization.
Profound and diverse, absolutely. Literature, philosophy, art, music, it's deeply woven into the fabric of Western culture. You think of Goethe and Schiller and literature and their Weimar classicism, harmony, humanity. Philosophy, Kant's revolution in thought on reason and autonomy. Hegel's dialectics, foundational for modern philosophy.
And art and music are just as significant.
Absolutely. From Renaissance artists like Albrecht Dürer through the Baroque, then the musical giants boxed complexity and emotion, Beethoven bridging classicism and romanticism with such power, Wagner's operatic innovations. The legacy is just immense, influencing generations right up to today.
Let's look a bit closer at literature and philosophy. Their influence often crossed borders, didn't it? Especially earlier on.
That's a really important point. Medieval German literature, for example, wasn't confined by modern national boundaries. It was shaped by religion, social status, region, many factors. Trying to impose a neat national tradition retrospectively, something that really started in the late 18th century, misses the fluidity and dynamism of how ideas and texts actually moved around.
And Latin was often the common language for scholarly work.
Exactly. Latin was the lingua franca for learned discourse. Plus, the history isn't linear. Texts were forgotten, rediscovered, adapted, translated. It challenges the idea of a simple, continuous German tradition. Simply saying anything written in German is German literature ignores dialects, the way language itself changed. You have to look at the complex interactions, not just modern labels.
And in art and music, especially after World War I, you see this powerful reflection of trauma and the search for peace.
Oh, profoundly. WWI was a watershed. It fueled a strong pacifist streak in artists like Ernst Barlach. Art became a way to directly confront the horrors. Think of Otto Dix's brutal depictions of war. It wasn't just reflecting reality, it was a kind of catharsis, a warning.
And this engagement with the war's consequences continued after WWII.
Yes, through exhibitions, media, constantly revisiting the impact on soldiers, on society. This ongoing dialogue with history has deeply shaped Germany's cultural consciousness, its collective memory. It feeds into that national pacifist sentiment that still influences German culture and politics today. And of course, new forms of artistic expression keep emerging as society changes. Contemporary German art still grapples with war, peace, memory, but also articulates current struggles in new ways. The experience of war remains a palpable force in the art world, showing the power of creativity to process and transform trauma.
So, to wrap things up, Germany's story is just extraordinary. From those tribal beginnings through empires, division, reunification, a journey of constant transformation.
Absolutely. We've seen these recurring themes pop up again and again. Resilience, adaptation, this continuous negotiation of what it means to be German, what national identity looks like.
And key periods like the post-WWII reconstruction, and especially Germany's deep embedding in the European Union, have been absolutely fundamental in shaping the Germany we see now.
Definitely. And, Germany's ongoing evolution, its demonstrated capacity to learn from its incredibly complex, often very difficult past, it really offers valuable lessons, I think, for any nation navigating change and figuring out its identity in this interconnected world we all live in now.
It really makes you think, doesn't it, how these powerful historical forces continue to shape nations, even today. Something to definitely keep exploring.